I never thought she would choose him over me, he whispered to himself, staring out the wide windows of their sunlit living room. The ranch stretching endlessly beyond the porch, golden light highlighting the green fields where they had once dreamed of building a future together. The air filled with the subtle scent of hay and fresh earth. The husband, in his mid-30s with neatly trimmed brown hair and fair skin, moved slowly toward the kitchen, recalling the morning when his wife, equally fair-skinned with soft blonde hair pulled into a casual ponytail, had smiled in a way that now seemed almost unknowingly deceptive. A simple conversation about chores and the weekend's plans masking the deeper tensions he had yet to perceive, his mind racing with subtle hints he had dismissed earlier, the extra phone calls, the sudden desire to visit friends he barely knew, the way she had laughed at messages he could not read, each small moment now weighing heavily on his conscience as he tried to reconcile the life they had built with the unease creeping into his heart. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the early morning air, and tried to focus on the familiar patterns of the ranch, the horses grazing lazily, the dogs playfully chasing each other in the distance, yet every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a reminder that something was off, the wind carrying the faintest echo of laughter that did not belong to him, making his chest tighten as he realized the calm surface of their daily life was merely a veneer over unspoken choices and impending revelations. He walked toward the barn where he usually started his day, each step deliberate, feeling the wooden boards creak beneath his boots, the rhythm of his routine offering a brief sense of normalcy. But the tension never fully dissipated, hovering over every task, from checking the fences to feeding the animals, each act intertwined with the gnawing suspicion that the life he knew was about to shift dramatically. The wife moved through the house, preparing breakfast, her expression serene yet tinged with an unspoken urgency, glancing occasionally at her phone as she hummed a tune that once signified domestic bliss, now a hollow melody that mirrored the unsteady foundation of their relationship, the sunlight catching the contours of her face, highlighting the warmth that had drawn him to her years before, a warmth now contrasted with the cold realization that their emotional paths were diverging. The husband watching silently from the doorway, feeling the distance grow even as they occupied the same space, his thoughts spiraling into questions of loyalty, trust, and the unseen forces guiding her choices, the familiar scent of pancakes and brewing coffee unable to mask the anxiety that had settled over him, a weight that would not lift until he confronted the truth lingering just beyond the threshold. The stage set for the unfolding drama, as the ranch, the home they had built, and the lives they had intertwined were poised at the precipice of change, the morning stretching endlessly ahead, each moment laden with potential discovery, reflection, and the emotional unraveling that comes when one's heart is challenged, the husband's voice finally breaking the silence in a soft murmur. "We need to talk," a simple phrase loaded with anticipation, dread, and the unspoken acknowledgement that everything familiar was about to be tested, setting the tone for the story that would follow, filled with tension, revelation, and the raw emotion of confronting a choice that would alter the course of their lives forever, each word, gesture, and glance pregnant with the significance of decisions made and the consequences yet to be faced, as the sun rose higher, illuminating both the beauty of the land and the fragility of trust, the husband and wife standing on the edge of understanding, the narrative of betrayal and self-discovery poised to unfold in a way that would capture every subtle nuance of feeling, every hesitant step toward confrontation, and the delicate balance between hope and heartbreak. The stage fully prepared for a journey through emotion, reflection, and revelation that would define their intertwined destinies. The morning air was crisp, and the sun cast long golden shadows across the wide expanse of the ranch as the husband walked along the dirt path toward the stables, each step deliberate, his mind still swirling with questions and the faint unease that had begun to settle in his chest the moment he had sensed something was amiss. He paused briefly to watch the livestock grazing calmly, the horses flicking their tails, oblivious to human complications, the rhythmic sounds of the farm offering a brief sense of normalcy. Yet he could not shake the feeling that each moment of calm was fragile, easily disrupted by the underlying tension between him and his wife, whose absence from their usual morning routine was now more noticeable, leaving empty spaces in the otherwise familiar flow of activity. Her soft laughter from days before still echoing in his memory, creating a mix of warmth and ache. Inside the house, she moved quietly from room to room, preparing breakfast with a measured efficiency that hinted at her own apprehension, glancing at her phone intermittently, her expression composed yet with subtle signs of distraction, the sunlight through the windows catching the strands of her hair and the fair skin of her face, highlighting both her beauty and the emotional distance that had begun to grow. Each small action she performed layered with unspoken intentions, leaving the husband to interpret gestures, silences, and glances that now carried weight far beyond their ordinary meanings. The mundane domestic environment suddenly charged with emotional tension. He retrieved a note she had left on the kitchen counter. Her handwriting familiar, yet the message brief, polite, and calculated. A simple list of tasks that belied the complexity of their relationship. And he could not help but read between the lines, searching for clues, trying to reconcile the woman he knew with the choices she seemed to be making. Each word on the paper a symbol of the growing divide, a marker of the subtle shifts in priorities and allegiances that had begun to alter the course of their shared life. The calm of the morning, disrupted not by noise or commotion, but by the quiet unraveling of trust and the anticipation of conversations that could no longer be postponed. As he sipped his coffee on the porch, the warm liquid offering little comfort against the chill of uncertainty, he considered the paths their lives had taken, the shared experiences that had once cemented their bond, and the unexpected directions they were now heading. The landscape of the ranch reflecting both the beauty of continuity and the stark reality of change, every familiar landmark now tinted with the knowledge that what had been stable was becoming unsettled, and every ordinary sound, the distant clatter of a gate, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the porch boards, seemed to underscore the quiet suspense of a life poised between familiarity and revelation, as he prepared to confront not only the facts of the day, but the truths that had been lingering unspoken in the spaces between them. The sun had climbed higher over the ranch, casting long, warm shadows that stretched across the weathered wooden fences, and the husband moved with a quiet determination, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he approached the barn, each step measured, each breath revealing the tension that lingered in his chest, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him like the early morning heat inside the barn. The smell of hay and leather mixed with the faint scent of horses, familiar and grounding. Yet he could not shake the unease that had settled in his mind, the absence of his wife from her usual tasks creating an emptiness that echoed louder than any clatter or noise, her presence felt in memories, gestures, and the lingering sense of connection now frayed by the invisible threads of uncertainty. She, meanwhile, moved in her own sphere, the sunlight filtering through the windows illuminating her fair skin and the careful way she organized supplies, each movement deliberate, a combination of domestic routine and unspoken purpose, glances cast toward the door and the phone betraying the careful calculations behind her composed demeanor. The subtle tension between them palpable in the quiet exchanges and shared silences that stretched longer than comfortable, each ordinary moment now imbued with layers of anticipation and speculation, the emotional landscape shifting as easily as the shadows along the barn walls. He lifted a small photograph from the workbench, a snapshot of a time when things were simpler, a moment frozen in memory that contrasted sharply with the current state of affairs, reminding him of laughter, shared meals, and quiet evenings that now seemed almost unreal. The clarity of the past highlighting the ambiguity of the present, each detail sharpened by the mind's attempt to reconcile memory with reality. As he turned to leave the barn, he caught a glimpse of her through the doorway, the morning light glinting off strands of her hair, her expression composed yet distant, hinting at thoughts unspoken, her eyes reflecting both determination and vulnerability, a complex interplay that left him both captivated and cautious, the subtleties of posture, hand movements, and fleeting expressions conveying a story unspoken, demanding attention to the nuances of human emotion and the fragile balance of trust, loyalty, and intention that underpin their interactions, each moment a delicate negotiation of understanding and expectation. Outside, The wind rustled through the trees lining the ranch, carrying scents of earth and grass, a sensory reminder of continuity amid personal upheaval, the vast horizon stretching beyond, symbolizing possibility and uncertainty simultaneously. As both of them navigated the intricate web of emotions, decisions, and the slow unraveling of assumptions, the familiar environment now charged with significance. Every ordinary object, sound, and gesture layered with meaning, creating a cinematic tension that held the promise of revelation, confrontation, and perhaps the first steps toward resolution in the midst of a day marked by both routine and transformation. She stepped onto the porch, her eyes scanning the horizon where the golden fields stretched endlessly, a soft breeze tousling her hair as the sunlight caught the strands, creating a halo effect around her fair skin. The husband watched from the doorway, his stance cautious yet attentive, a mixture of curiosity and concern etched across his features, the tension between them palpable despite the serene ranch backdrop. Each gesture charged with unspoken questions and the anticipation of revelation. Inside the house, the quiet hum of daily chores underscored the subtle drama, the creaking of floorboards and the gentle clatter of dishes punctuating the otherwise still atmosphere, both of them moving in a rhythm that was familiar yet now layered with uncertainty as each action, glance, and pause conveyed volumes without a single word being spoken. She paused at the kitchen counter, fingers tracing the edge of a photograph that captured a moment of shared laughter and closeness, a silent reminder of a connection that felt simultaneously strong and fragile, the weight of past choices pressing softly against the present as he observed from the hall, noting the slight tightening of her jaw and the careful way she arranged the items, gestures that hinted at inner deliberations. The complexity of their emotions mirrored in the quiet domestic scene. As they both stepped outside, the air held the scent of sun-warmed hay and distant wildflowers, a sensory backdrop to the subtle dance of reconciliation and tension, the ranch itself standing as both witness and participant in the unfolding narrative. Its open spaces amplifying both isolation and intimacy, each step across the gravel or wooden porch sounding louder in the charged silence, the environment mirroring the internal landscapes of hope, hesitation, and quiet determination. Their conversation began with measured tones, questions and replies flowing in a cadence that betrayed neither fully, a careful balance of probing and restraint, each word weighted with meaning. The dynamics of trust, expectation, and the potential for understanding playing out in real time, their fair complexions catching the sunlight as they turned toward one another, expressions flickering from curiosity to recognition, the intricate interplay of past experiences and present realities weaving a delicate tapestry of emotional complexity, leaving both aware that every small gesture, every fleeting expression, held significance in the unspoken dialogue that defined this moment on the ranch, a prelude to the choices and revelations that awaited. By late afternoon, the quiet rhythm of the ranch began to fracture in ways the husband could no longer explain away as stress or distance. He found the first real sign in the mudroom, tucked beneath a folded denim jacket she had stopped wearing months ago, a receipt from a roadside diner 30 miles west, dated the previous Tuesday, at a time when she had told him she was helping a friend in town. The receipt itself was ordinary: 2 coffees, 1 slice of apple pie, 1 grilled chicken sandwich, but the handwritten note on the back made the air leave his chest for a moment. It said, "Same booth next week, just like old times." No name, no signature, only a sentence that carried too much history to belong to a stranger. He stood there with the paper in his hand while the evening light poured through the small window above the booths, turning dust in the air into gold. For years, he had trusted small explanations because marriage often survives on the mercy of not questioning every late errand, every quiet mood, every phone turned face down at the dinner table. But trust has a sound when it cracks, and in that mudroom, it sounded like a thin piece of paper being folded once, then unfolded again. She came in from the porch a few minutes later, brushing wind from her hair, her face calm until she saw what he was holding. The pause between them lasted less than a second, but it told him more than any confession could have. "Where did you find that?" she asked, too quickly. He looked at the receipt, then back at her. That is the wrong first question. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time that day, the serene mask she had worn around the house slipped enough for something colder to show beneath it. I had coffee with someone I used to know, she said. That is not a crime. He nodded slowly, not because he accepted the answer, but because he had learned that people reveal more when they think they are still controlling the room. Someone you used to know, he repeated. She crossed her arms, defensive now. His name is Ryan. You remember him? Of course he remembered. The ex-boyfriend from before the marriage. The man who had once left her crying in a parking lot and later reappeared in stories as if time had polished him into someone noble. The husband had not heard that name in years, but suddenly it explained the sudden laughter at her phone, the secret errands, the careful dressing for simple afternoons, the way she had begun looking at the ranch like it was a cage instead of a home. Outside, the horses shifted near the fence, and a gate creaked in the wind, a familiar sound made strange by the weight of her silence. Why did you not tell me? He asked. She looked away toward the fields, her voice lower when she answered. Because you would not understand. That sentence did what the receipt had not. It moved the story from suspicion into betrayal. He thought of all the mornings he had fixed broken fence rails before breakfast, all the evenings he had come in exhausted and still asked about her day, all the small pieces of devotion so ordinary they had become invisible. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her in front of the walls that had held their marriage for years. He only set the receipt on the counter between them and said, "Then explain it now." She stared at the paper like it had betrayed her, not him. For a moment, he thought she might reach for honesty, but her phone lit up before she could speak. She glanced down. One name appeared on the screen, bright and undeniable, Ryan. The husband watched her hand close around the phone, and in that quiet motion, he understood the truth. She had not been drifting away into confusion. She had been walking backward toward a man from her past while pretending the distance was his fault. The ranch outside kept breathing in the wind, steady and unchanged, but inside the house, something old and fragile finally gave way. The next morning, the husband woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, a comfort and a warning all at once. He found her at the counter, eyes distant, staring at the steam rising from the cup as if it carried messages only she could read. He watched her for a moment, remembering the woman who had shared laughter and long drives across the hills, and now struggled to reconcile the familiar presence with the secrets he had discovered. "I need to know the truth," he said quietly, not wanting to provoke a fight, only clarity. She turned to him, her expression softening but edged with hesitation, and for a moment, he thought she might finally confess everything. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I wanted to protect you from the past," a phrase heavy with unspoken memories and untold stories. He set his hand gently on hers, feeling the tension and the warmth, and knew that the conversation they were about to have would change the course of their relationship forever. As they spoke, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the wooden floors and illuminating the small details of the kitchen that had seen both love and distance. The chipped mugs, the worn table, the photograph of them at the county fair, smiling and unaware of the storms to come. Outside, the ranch was alive with movement. The horses shifted in the fields, a dog barked at a distant fence, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses. These sounds, ordinary and grounding, contrasted with the complexity of the words exchanged inside. She spoke of old feelings, regrets, and the decisions that had led her to meet someone from her past, someone who had once held a piece of her heart she had thought was long sealed. The husband listened, the weight of disbelief and sorrow pressing on him, yet he maintained a steady presence, allowing space for honesty without interruption. Time seemed to bend, each minute stretching as they untangled the web of past choices, revealing motivations, mistakes, and unspoken desires. He realized that understanding would not erase the hurt, but it could illuminate a path forward, and he asked questions, careful and precise, seeking to know every detail without accusation. She answered with clarity, her voice firm yet vulnerable, and as the morning faded into afternoon, a fragile sense of resolution began to form. They discussed what had been lost, what could be rebuilt, and the boundaries that needed to be established to regain trust. The air shifted subtly, carrying a tentative hope, and for the first time in days, The husband felt the possibility of reconciliation, knowing it would require effort, patience, and forgiveness. Outside, the ranch continued its quiet life, indifferent to human conflict, yet it held the promise of renewal, a constant reminder that even after confusion and betrayal, growth and understanding could emerge from the honesty shared in that small kitchen filled with morning light. He woke to the sound of wind brushing against the old wooden fences, a subtle reminder of the life they had built together on the ranch, yet his mind was still entangled in the previous day's revelations. She emerged from the hallway, sunlight catching the soft highlights in her hair, her expression cautious but determined, signaling she wanted to continue the difficult conversation. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, voice quiet yet firm, and he nodded slowly, acknowledging the words while feeling the weight of betrayal. They moved to the porch, the vast expanse of fields stretching before them, each step on the weathered wood creaking under the tension between them. He gestured toward the pastures, recalling days spent together tending the animals, planting crops, and building fences, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that now hung in the air. She spoke of her past decisions, the pull of old feelings, and the mistakes she had made that brought them to this fragile point, while he listened intently, trying to decipher truth from omission, seeking clarity without anger. The horses in the distance shifted restlessly, their presence a grounding influence as they discussed boundaries, trust, and the effort required to rebuild their life. He asked questions about her choices, motivations, and what she envisioned for their future, and she answered with honesty, the morning light catching the resolve in her eyes, mingled with vulnerability. As the conversation unfolded, they traced the contours of pain and understanding, revealing emotions neither had articulated before, learning how to reconcile lingering resentment with the possibility of reconciliation. Time seemed to slow, each word weighted with significance, while the ranch continued its quiet rhythms, indifferent yet comforting in its constancy. They paused occasionally to absorb the gravity of each revelation, to consider forgiveness, to find a path forward that allowed them to coexist with the truths uncovered. The husband's hand found hers again, a gesture of tentative support, and together they surveyed the horizon, realizing that healing would be neither instant nor easy, but possible if approached with patience and empathy. Shadows lengthened across the land, painting the familiar terrain with new perspectives, and in that shared silence, both felt a fragile sense of renewal, an acknowledgement that even amidst complicated emotions and past mistakes, they could start rebuilding trust one careful step at a time, the open fields before them promising space for reflection, dialogue, and eventual reconciliation. The morning sun rose higher over the sprawling ranch, illuminating the worn paths and grazing cattle as he stepped outside to check the fences, each creak of the wood echoing the unresolved tension from the previous day. She appeared by the barn, carrying a basket of freshly gathered eggs, her expression contemplative yet open, signaling a willingness to engage in conversation without pretense. "I need to explain everything," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet fields, and he nodded, inviting her to share her thoughts as they walked together along the gravel drive. The crisp air carried the scent of hay and earth, grounding them in the tangible reality of their shared life, while the emotional landscape remained complex. She spoke of her choices, her lingering doubts, and the moments of clarity that brought her back to the ranch, each word weighed with sincerity and vulnerability, while he listened, measuring each admission against the trust he had yet to fully rebuild. They paused by the old oak tree, the shade casting intricate patterns on the ground, and he asked questions about her intentions and vision for the future, her answers reflecting a careful balance of honesty and hope, a desire to mend bridges without erasing past mistakes. The horses nearby shifted, their gentle movements a rhythmic backdrop to the nuanced conversation, providing a sense of continuity and calm as they navigated the delicate terrain of reconciliation. She recounted the moments of tension with her ex, the internal conflicts that challenged her, and the realization of what truly mattered, and he absorbed each detail, the morning light highlighting both determination and remorse in her eyes. Together, they revisited the tasks that filled their days, discussing responsibilities, shared goals, and ways to strengthen their bond, the familiar routines serving as anchors amidst the emotional ebb and flow. The distant hills, golden in the early light, symbolized potential paths forward, offering space for reflection and planning, while their conversation unfolded naturally, with pauses that allowed each to process emotions and respond thoughtfully. Hand in hand, they surveyed the open fields, acknowledging the complexities of the past, while contemplating the effort required for a renewed partnership, understanding that forgiveness would be gradual and deliberate. Time seemed to stretch, each moment weighted with significance, as they recognized the necessity of patience, empathy, and consistent communication to rebuild the trust that had been strained, the ranch itself standing as a witness to their evolving journey and the tentative steps toward healing. By the time the afternoon heat settled over the ranch, the truth no longer sat between them like a rumor. It had a name, a phone number, and a history she had tried to soften with words like confusion and closure. The husband stood by the round pen, one hand resting on the top rail, watching a young horse circle slowly through the dust while his wife remained a few feet away with her arms folded against herself, no longer carrying the easy confidence she had worn when the secrets were still hers alone. Ryan called again. He said, not as a question, because the screen had lit up on the porch table less than 10 minutes earlier while she was pouring iced tea. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them toward the far pasture. He says he wants to help me think clearly. The husband let that sentence hang in the dry air, listening to how hollow it sounded against the honest noise of ranch life. Hooves in the dirt, wind through grass, a gate chain tapping against metal. A man who helps you think clearly does not ask you to hide diner receipts, he said. She looked down, and that small movement told him she knew it too. The ex-boyfriend had not returned as a memory. He had returned as an option, polished by time and distance until she could pretend he represented freedom instead of unfinished regret. Over the next few days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She stepped outside for calls that ended the moment the husband came near. She changed the password on an old email account she had not used in years. She started speaking of needing space and perspective, words that sounded peaceful but landed like boxes being packed in another room. He did not chase her through the house. He did not beg for explanations that would only be edited before they reached him. Instead, he watched the life around him continue with brutal clarity. The cattle still needed feed. The water trough still clogged with silt after the windstorm. The fence along the creek still leaned where a post had rotted through. A marriage could tremble, but the ranch did not pause to pity a man. One evening, as sunset spread orange across the fields, she came to the barn wearing the blue sweater he had bought her 2 Christmases ago and said, I am going into town for a while. He set down the saddle soap in his hand. To see him? Her face tightened. To think? He nodded once. Those are different things. She glanced toward the house, toward the porch where they had once sat through summer thunderstorms, toward the kitchen windows glowing warm behind them, and for a second her expression almost broke. I feel like I lost myself here, she said. The husband looked around at the stalls he had repaired, the feed sacks stacked by the door, the old lantern hanging from a beam, the place she had once called peaceful before peace became too quiet for her. No, he said gently. You started calling responsibility a cage because someone from your past told you the door was still open. Her eyes filled, but she did not deny it. The next morning, she left before breakfast, taking 2 suitcases, her laptop, and the silver bracelet she wore when she wanted to feel like the younger version of herself. She left her coffee mug in the sink and a short note on the counter saying she needed time with someone who understood who she used to be. The husband read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the diner receipt in the top drawer of his desk. Then he walked out to the barn because the horses were waiting, and because a man can be abandoned before sunrise and still have chores by 6. Around noon, the phone rang. It was her sister, voice careful, already informed by a story in which the husband had become distant, controlling, and too wrapped up in ranch life to notice his wife fading away. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said only, I hope she told you she chose to leave with Ryan. The silence on the other end was enough to tell him she had not. By evening, the first rumors had already reached the feed store, soft as dust, and just as hard to keep out once they started moving. Some people looked at him with sympathy. Others looked with curiosity. He bought mineral blocks, paid the invoice, and carried them to the truck without giving anyone a performance. The pain was there, steady and deep, but so was something else. The beginning of distance from a woman who had mistaken nostalgia for rescue and mistook his quiet for defeat. As he drove back through the ranch gate, the tires crunching over gravel, he saw the house against the sunset and understood that the first thing she had lost was not him. It was the truth of what she was leaving behind. The next morning brought an uneasy calm over the ranch, with the sun casting long shadows across the dusty paddocks while the husband moved about methodically, checking fences, stacking feed, and tending to the chores that refused to wait for emotions to settle. The house remained empty of her presence, the living room echoing faintly with the memory of her voice and the clink of coffee cups that would no longer be used in tandem. He paused at the gate where the cattle grazed lazily, considering the letters and messages she had left behind, small tokens that now seemed to carry more weight than any declaration she could have made face to face. It is one thing to choose freedom, another entirely to lose sight of reality, he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the horizon where the early haze blurred the mountains into muted gray silhouettes. Across town, her sister sent updates about her whereabouts, each message like a breadcrumb marking a path that neither led to clarity nor absolution, just the gentle pull of curiosity and concern that he refused to indulge. The husband continued through the barn, brushing the stalls, organizing tack, the rhythm of daily life acting as both anchor and reminder that the world moved on despite personal upheaval. The horse he had been training stepped closer, sniffing his boot, and he offered a scratch behind the ear, appreciating the silent company that required no explanation or apology. By midday, the ex-boyfriend's presence became more than rumor, arriving in town with a confident stride, and though the husband maintained a careful distance, he could feel the invisible tension stretching between all three lives in a delicate balance of past choices and present consequences. She appeared briefly in the doorway of the old barn, carrying a bag and an expression tinged with apprehension, and for a moment, words seemed possible, but they dissolved into the thick ranch air as if swallowed by the wind. He nodded toward her, acknowledging the complicated truth without confrontation, the acknowledgement itself a quiet form of authority and understanding. The day moved forward with the sound of hooves and the occasional clatter of tools, each moment punctuated by the absence she had created, yet framed by the resilience and routine he embodied. Even as the town's murmurs began to hint at speculation, he focused on feeding livestock, repairing gates, and maintaining the order of the land, each action a testament to endurance and measured patience, a subtle assertion that life, work, and integrity could persist in the shadow of emotional turbulence. Evening approached, painting the horizon in strokes of orange and violet, and he stood on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, reflecting on choices made, consequences faced, and the quiet strength it required to keep moving forward when personal losses weighed heavily. The day closed with an unspoken promise to himself, to honor the stability and truth of his own path, remaining steadfast while the echoes of the decisions made by others faded into the soft twilight, a rhythm of acceptance and endurance shaping the life that remained, anchored by the land, routine, and the unwavering reality that only he could steward. Morning light filtered softly through the windows, illuminating the quiet farmhouse where the husband moved with careful deliberation, organizing papers and tending to the kitchen with a focus that seemed almost meditative. The absence of his wife created a weight in the air, a space filled with the echoes of routines now altered and conversations that would never be spoken aloud, yet each gesture, from stacking dishes to checking the mailbox, carried an unspoken resolve to maintain order and clarity amidst uncertainty. Outside, the fields stretched endlessly, the cattle grazing under a sky painted with the soft blush of dawn, and he found solace in the familiar rhythms of farm life, each task anchoring him as the news of her choices began to circulate among neighbors and friends, whispers that reached his ears but did not deter his steady approach to the day. He paused by the old oak near the barn, recalling moments of laughter and shared planning, the warmth of past companionship now shadowed by the reality of her departure and the sudden presence of her ex-boyfriend, whose arrival had set in motion a series of complications neither had anticipated, and he considered carefully the delicate balance of engagement and detachment required to navigate the unfolding circumstances. Letters and notes she had left behind lay on the counter, reminders of connections frayed by decisions and misunderstandings, and as he read through them, he noted both the clarity and the ambiguity within, understanding that some explanations were left unspoken intentionally, perhaps as a test of resilience or an invitation to introspection. Throughout the morning, he moved among the animals, adjusting feed and ensuring the barn was secure, each action deliberate, measured, and reflective of a steadfast commitment to continuity despite personal upheaval. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying scents of fresh hay and the faint aroma of wood smoke from the stove, grounding him in the sensory reality of life that required attention regardless of emotional turbulence. The ex-boyfriend appeared briefly on the far edge of the property, casual yet purposeful, and the husband observed from a distance, noting posture, gestures, and the subtle tension in every interaction, acknowledging the necessity of presence without intrusion, readiness without confrontation. As afternoon waned, shadows stretched long across the land, and he stood on the porch, eyes following the horizon where mountains met sky, reflecting on the sequence of choices that led to this quiet confrontation with circumstance, and he resolved to maintain dignity and composure, honoring the commitments to land, livestock, and his own sense of integrity, while understanding that the paths of others, though intertwined temporarily with his, were guided by separate intentions, leaving him to navigate the unfolding day with measured patience, focus, and an unwavering adherence to personal and practical responsibility. By the third week after she left, the shape of her new life had begun to lose the shine she had imagined for it. The husband learned this not because he followed her, not because he asked around, and not because he tried to pull sympathy from the town, but because consequences have a way of arriving at the front gate even when a man does not invite them. Her sister called first, voice low and careful, saying the wife was staying in a small rental outside town with Ryan, and that things were not as simple as she had expected. Ryan had talked about freedom when he was sending messages and meeting her in quiet places, but freedom sounded different when groceries, rent, gas, and ordinary responsibilities showed up with receipts attached. The wife had left the ranch believing the past would make her feel young again, but the past had no cattle to feed, no fence to mend, no porch light waiting through a storm, and no husband quietly making sure the bills were paid before anyone noticed how tight the month had become. The husband listened without satisfaction. He stood in the barn office with one hand resting on the scarred wooden desk, looking at the folded diner receipt and the note she had left behind, both now sealed in a plain envelope alongside bank records, phone screenshots, and the contact information for a family attorney he had finally agreed to meet. The attorney, a calm woman named Patricia Nolan, had told him the same thing his own instincts had been saying for days. Keep records, protect the ranch accounts, separate personal grief from practical decisions, and do not answer emotional chaos with emotional chaos. So he did not call his wife to remind her what she had lost. He did not text Ryan. He did not stand in the feed store letting anger turn into gossip. He worked. He paid invoices. He checked the east fence after a windstorm. He kept the house clean enough that absence did not become decay. Still, the echoes came. A neighbor mentioned that Ryan had been seen arguing with the wife outside the county office about money. Her sister said the wife had asked whether the husband might be willing to talk things through if she came by. Then, one evening just after sunset, the wife arrived at the ranch in a borrowed car, stepping out slowly as if the gravel itself remembered what she had done. She looked different, not ruined, not helpless, but stripped of the certainty she had carried when Ryan's name first lit her phone. Her hair was tied back carelessly, her coat wrinkled, her eyes red from something deeper than lack of sleep. The husband met her by the porch steps, hands in his jacket pockets, the house glowing warm behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The horses shifted in the pasture, and the wind moved through the dry grass with the same sound it had made before she left, before Ryan, before the receipt, before every quiet lie found its shape. "I made a mistake," she said. He looked at her, and the words did not land the way she seemed to expect. They were too small for the damage, too late for the trust, and too easy compared to the nights he had spent carrying the weight alone. You made a choice, he said. She swallowed, glancing toward the kitchen window, where the lamp above the table still burned the way it always had. Ryan is not who I thought he was. The husband nodded once. Neither were you. The sentence was not cruel. That was what made it harder. She looked down, and her face tightened as if she had finally reached the part of the story where no one else could be blamed. She spoke of confusion, loneliness, old feelings, promises Ryan had made and failed to keep, but the husband heard what sat beneath it all. She had wanted the feeling of being chosen without honoring the life that had already chosen her every morning. She had wanted excitement without sacrifice, history without accountability, a door back to youth without losing the home adulthood had built. When she asked whether she could come inside, he did not move right away. He looked past her at the road, then at the fields darkening under the Montana sky. Not tonight, he said. Her eyes filled, but he held steady. This house is not a place you leave to test another life and return to when the test fails. The wind rose between them, cool and clean. She nodded slowly, like a woman hearing a verdict no court had to speak. Then she turned back toward the borrowed car, and for the first time since she chose her past over their present, the husband felt the truth settle without needing to chase it. She had not lost everything in one dramatic moment. She had lost it piece by piece. Every time she mistook stability for boredom, loyalty for weakness, and a good man's silence for an open door. The morning air was sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint aroma of hay from the barn, and he stood at the edge of the porch watching the sunlight slice through the gaps in the fence, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the freshly raked paths, while inside, the quiet hum of the house suggested that life had resumed a rhythm undisturbed by yesterday's tension. He thought about the choices made, the conversations that had ended, and the subtle shifts in expression that told him the truth no words could, for she had returned briefly to collect herself, to see what remained after decisions and desires had collided, and the wife, standing now at the top step with her coat drawn tightly, glanced toward the pastures, eyes tracing the line of the fence where he had worked hours before, each post mended, each wire taut. A silent testimony to the steadfast care he had given the land and the life they had built together. She realized that what she had sought outside had no permanence, no continuity, and the thrill she had imagined was fleeting compared to the enduring, quiet strength that filled the rooms behind him. He inhaled, letting the morning sun warm his face, knowing the conversation to come would be measured, cautious, necessary, and it would not be easy for either of them, yet he held a stillness that was deliberate, an invitation to reflection rather than confrontation, and she stepped closer, hesitant, aware that the porch steps marked the boundary between old security and new understanding. Every movement deliberate, every glance loaded with unspoken acknowledgement of mistakes, misjudgments, and lessons painfully learned. He saw in her a recognition that the choices made had consequences, that the life she had chosen away from the ranch was a life incomplete, a life without the foundation that patience, commitment, and care had provided. And as she spoke softly, her voice carrying both regret and clarity, she admitted her miscalculations, the illusions of freedom that had led her astray, the empty promises she had believed, the misread signals that had guided her steps. And he listened without interruption, letting the words fill the space between them without judgment, absorbing the weight of honesty, the fragile offering of accountability. And then he replied calmly, measured, with a firmness that acknowledged the past but did not let it dictate the present, reminding her that actions have outcomes, that trust is earned through constancy, and that the home she had left was not a place to seek reassurance after wandering, that the lessons she carried must be reconciled internally before any step forward. And she nodded, taking in the gravity of his words, understanding that the horizon beyond the fence was wide but uncertain, that the life she had glimpsed was not without struggle, that the comfort she had once dismissed had real value. And finally, after a long pause, she turned, retracing her steps down the gravel path, the wind catching her hair, the sun reflecting in her eyes, leaving him standing at the porch, still, contemplative, aware that the chapter had closed not with anger, but with the quiet, resilient assertion of boundaries, the recognition of what endures, and the knowledge that the land, the house, and the life he tended continued forward, unbroken. A testament to perseverance, clarity, and the enduring power of measured reflection.